Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoy my video, please click the like button and share the video. It is the only way the YouTube algorithms really notices me. I will be very grateful to you. The Shattered Window shows a different world. Scary story published by Scare Fiction. Read for you by Scare Fiction. Chapter 1. The Fracture. The air in New England had a bite to it, even in early autumn. Emma Warren tightened her coat around her, hesitating at the threshold of the old, weathered house. The memories hit her like a cold gust of wind, moments from a childhood she'd tried to forget. She hadn't seen this place in over a decade, not since Daniel had disappeared. The paint on the clapboard siding had long since peeled away, revealing patches of gray wood beneath. The windows were grimy, most of them boarded up or cracked, but it was the house she had inherited, the one she had no choice but to return to after the divorce. Starting over in Boston hadn't worked, so here she was, back in the small town of Ashford, where everyone still whispered about the Warrens' tragedy. Inside, the house smelled of dust and neglect. Emma's boots echoed hollowly on the wooden floorboards as she stepped into the living room. The place was a time capsule of her childhood, a once cozy, now crumbling relic. Faded wallpaper clung stubbornly to the walls, and the furniture was still covered in sheets, ghostly shapes of what once was. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and something else she couldn't place, something that made her uneasy. Emma's fingers brushed over the back of the old armchair, a familiar knot of emotions tightening in her chest. She didn't want to be here, but the renovation was a distraction, a project to keep her mind occupied. Anything to avoid dwelling on the past and the life she'd left behind in Boston. Climbing the stairs, she felt every creak and groan beneath her weight, each sound like a whisper in the quiet house. When she reached the second floor, she paused outside the door to her old bedroom, the wood splintered and worn from years of disuse. With a deep breath, she pushed it open. The room was smaller than she remembered. Her bed frame was still there, its iron posts rusting. But it was the window that drew her attention, a large, cracked pane of glass that had always let in the morning light. Now, it was shattered, the jagged edges catching the weak daylight that filtered through. Emma frowned, stepping closer. The break was strange, not like something had hit it, but like something had forced its way out. She felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air seeping through the broken window. An unsettling presence hovered, as if the room was holding its breath, waiting. She shivered, rubbing her arms, and turned away quickly, pushing the creeping fear to the back of her mind. "It's just a broken window," she whispered to herself, though the words did little to ease the unease settling deep in her bones. As she left the room, the house seemed to sigh around her, the floorboards groaning in a way that almost sounded like her name. Chapter 2. The Whispering Shadows. Emma closed the door to her old bedroom with a deliberate click, as if sealing off the unease that had taken root there. But the unsettling feeling lingered, following her down the narrow hallway and back into the living room. She tried to shake it off, attributing the sensation to the dust, the disrepair, or simply the memories. But as evening fell and the shadows deepened, she couldn't escape the gnawing dread that something wasn't right. That night, Emma's sleep was restless. The old house creaked and groaned, the sounds almost too deliberate, as if someone or something was moving through the rooms. She found herself back in her childhood, standing at the foot of her bed, staring at the same shattered window. The dream was so vivid, it felt like a memory. She could see her brother Daniel, just a boy again, standing on the other side of the glass. His face was pale, eyes wide with fear, as he whispered something she couldn't quite hear. "Emma, please, help me." She jolted awake, drenched in sweat, her heart pounding. The darkness of the room pressed in around her, and for a moment, she wasn't sure where she was. The dream clung to her like a second skin, Daniel's voice still echoing in her ears. She sat up, her breath coming in shallow gasps, trying to convince herself it was just a dream. But deep down, she knew better. The next morning, Emma tried to bury herself in the renovation work, but the unease from the previous night lingered. As she scrubbed the grime from the kitchen cabinets and stripped the old wallpaper, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The house, once merely old and forgotten, now felt like a living thing, its walls closing in around her. It started with small things. A book she knew she'd left on the coffee table was suddenly across the room. A chair in the kitchen would be out of place when she returned from another room. The cold spots near the shattered window grew more pronounced, like invisible hands reaching out to her. And then there were the whispers. At first, she thought it was the wind, the old house, creaking in the night. But soon she realized the sounds were forming words her name, whispered so softly it was almost imperceptible, carried on the air as if someone was standing right behind her. By the third day, Emma's nerves were frayed. Sleep brought no peace, only more dreams of Daniel, each one more vivid than the last. In these dreams, he was always near the window, his small hands pressed against the glass, his voice a pleading whisper. The line between dreams and reality blurred, and Emma found herself drawn to the shattered window, staring into the fractured glass as if it might reveal the answers she so desperately sought. The house had become a maze of shadows and uncertainty. Emma began to question her sanity, the thin veneer of normalcy peeling away with every whisper, every unexplained movement. She knew she should leave, that staying in the house was tearing at her mind, but the thought of abandoning the place where Daniel had last been felt like another betrayal. And so, she stayed, trapped between her fear and her guilt, unable to leave but terrified of what she might uncover if she stayed. The shattered window loomed large in her mind, a symbol of everything she had tried to forget, and of the dark, otherworldly forces she was beginning to realize she might not be able to escape. Chapter 3: The Lost and the Found. The days that followed felt like a slow descent into madness. Emma couldn't ignore the whispers, the cold spots, or the eerie sense that her brother's disappearance was more than just a tragic accident. Driven by a mix of desperation and guilt, she decided to dig into the history of the house, hoping to find answers that might explain the strange occurrences and the connection to Daniel. The Ashford Public Library was a relic, much like the town itself, filled with dusty shelves and old books that hadn't been touched in years. The librarian, a frail woman with sharp eyes, pointed Emma to the local history section without a word, as if she knew exactly what she was looking for. Emma spent hours combing through newspaper clippings and town records. Stories of disappearances surfaced again and again, always involving children, always near her family's home. But the most unsettling discovery was an article from over 30 years ago, reporting the disappearance of a child who had lived in the same house before her family had moved in. The article mentioned a shattered window, much like the one in Emma's bedroom, as the last known location of the child before they vanished. Lost in thought, Emma didn't notice the man who had been watching her from across the room until he approached. He was tall, with disheveled hair, and a look that was somewhere between curiosity and obsession. "Ethan Cooper," he introduced himself, holding out a hand. "You're Emma Warren, aren't you? I read about your family's tragedy." Emma nodded warily. "I am. How do you know that?" "I'm a historian. Well, more of a paranormal enthusiast," he admitted with a slight smile. "I've been researching the strange events in this town for years. Your house, it's infamous around here." Emma tensed. "What do you mean?" "There's a legend," Ethan began, leaning in as if to share a secret. "About a portal to another world, another dimension, if you will, connected to your house. Some believe that the shattered window in your bedroom is the key. The last barrier between our world and the one where the lost children are trapped. Emma's heart raced. You're saying my brother might still be alive? That he's in that other world? Ethan hesitated, sensing the desperation in her voice. It's possible. But you need to understand, Emma, if that window is a portal, interacting with it could be incredibly dangerous. There are symbols, ancient markings, that suggest a ritual or curse that opened the portal years ago. Whoever did it knew what they were doing. They didn't just open a door, they broke the very fabric of reality. Emma's mind raced with the implications. The dreams, the whispers, the cold spots, it all pointed to something far more sinister than she had imagined. But the thought that Daniel might still be out there, somewhere, was too powerful to ignore. I have to find him, she whispered, more to herself than to Ethan. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. If you're serious about this, then we need to be careful. We'll need to understand those symbols, figure out what exactly happened, and whether it can be undone. But I'm warning you, Emma, once you start down this path, there's no going back. Emma looked into Ethan's eyes, seeing both the caution and the flicker of excitement. He was intrigued, drawn in by the possibility of proving his theories about the paranormal. But for her, this was about more than curiosity. It was about saving her brother and finally laying her past to rest. As they left the library, the weight of what lay ahead settled over them both, heavy with the knowledge that the truth they sought might be darker and more terrifying than they could ever imagine. Chapter 4. The Other Side. The house seemed to breathe with a life of its own as the days passed, every creak and groan echoing through Emma's mind, amplifying the tension that gripped her. She had started to see things that shouldn't have been there. At first, they were just fleeting shadows in the corner of her eye, but soon they became more tangible, more real. One night, as she stood before the shattered window, a strange compulsion washed over her. The air around the window felt different, thick and oppressive, almost as if it were charged with some unseen energy. Emma could barely tear her eyes away from the glass. It rippled and shimmered, distorting the reflection of her own face until it morphed into something else, a landscape, dark and twisted, stretched out before her. Beyond the glass, the world was a nightmarish vision of what she knew. The trees outside were gnarled and dead, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The sky was a sickly shade of red, streaked with black clouds that swirled ominously. But what truly froze her blood was the figure standing in the distance, Daniel. He looked older, more gaunt, his eyes hollow and terrified. He was waving, or perhaps reaching out for her, his lips moving, though no sound reached her ears. Emma! The voice was barely a whisper, but it filled her mind, drowning out all rational thought. She stumbled back, her heart hammering in her chest, but she couldn't look away. The window had become a magnet, pulling her in, demanding her attention. She felt a cold sweat break out on her skin as the world behind the glass called to her, beckoning her closer. Her grip on reality began to slip. She started spending hours in front of the window, staring into that other world, her mind spiraling into obsession. The boundaries between the two worlds blurred. She would hear Daniel's voice in the middle of the day, feel a cold hand on her shoulder, only to turn around and find no one there. She knew she was losing herself, but the thought of abandoning her brother to that twisted place was unbearable. On the fourth night, as the house was enveloped in silence, Emma couldn't resist the pull any longer. With trembling fingers, she reached out and touched the glass. The surface felt cold at first, but then it began to ripple like the surface of a pond disturbed by a stone. The world beyond seemed to surge forward, the colors and shapes twisting and contorting as they bled into her reality. Without warning, the window sucked her in. The sensation was overwhelming, a a cold, crushing pressure that wrapped around her like a vise. The twisted landscape consumed her, the world a cacophony of shrieks and whispers. Shadows moved at the edges of her vision, darting closer and closer until she saw them clearly dark, eyeless figures, their mouths open in silent screams. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. She was thrown back into her reality, landing on the floor in a heap, gasping for air. The window was just a window again, but the clock on the wall told a different story. What had felt like seconds in that other world had been hours in hers. Time, it seemed, had no meaning on the other side. Shaken to her core, Emma realized the truth. She could enter that world, but the cost was unimaginable. She could try to save Daniel, but what if she couldn't return? What if she was lost forever, trapped in that hellish landscape with those shadowy figures? The moral dilemma weighed heavily on her. She had to risk everything to save her brother and the others who were trapped, or protect herself and leave the past behind. But with each passing day, the pull of the shattered window grew stronger, and Emma knew her decision couldn't be delayed much longer. Chapter 5. The Broken Mind. Emma's days blurred into a haze of sleepless nights and waking nightmares. Every time she closed her eyes, the twisted landscape of the other world awaited her, with Daniel's terrified face etched into her memory. But now, it wasn't just in her dreams. She started seeing flashes of that dark, horrifying place in her waking hours. Shadowy figures lurking in corners, whispers in the wind that chilled her to the bone. She could no longer tell where one world ended and the other began. The once familiar walls of her childhood home felt like they were closing in on her. The creaking of the floorboards and the constant draft that blew through the shattered window became a cruel reminder of the place that called to her night and day. She could feel her grip on reality slipping, the boundary between what was real and what was a product of her fractured mind blurring beyond recognition. Ethan noticed the change in her almost immediately. He tried to help, to talk to her, but Emma grew more distant with each passing day. She pushed him away, convinced that only she could save Daniel. His words became nothing but noise in her ears, his presence an unwanted intrusion. She knew he meant well, but how could he possibly understand the weight of her guilt, the fear of failing Daniel again? She had been the last to see him before he vanished, and she had done nothing to save him then. She wouldn't make that mistake again. Ethan's growing concern did nothing to sway her. She became consumed by her mission, spending hours poring over the symbols they had found, trying to decipher their meaning. But it was all in vain. The more she tried to understand, the more the answers eluded her, slipping through her fingers like sand. She was on the brink of despair when she found the journal. Hidden away in the dusty corner of an old, forgotten room, the leather-bound book was fragile with age, its pages yellowed and brittle. Emma's heart raced as she opened it, her hands trembling. The journal belonged to someone who had lived in the house decades ago, someone who had also encountered the shattered window and the world beyond it. As she read, Emma felt a chill run down her spine. The entries described experiences eerily similar to her own, the whispers, the glimpses of the other world, the overwhelming sense of dread. The previous occupant had been driven to the brink of madness, just as she was now. But it was the final entries that truly shook her. They spoke of a ritual, a way to close the portal and seal the other world away. But the writer had failed, and the consequences had been dire. The journal hinted at sacrifice, the price that must be paid to close the portal. The previous occupant had been unable to go through with it and had paid with their sanity. Emma could feel the same madness creeping into her mind, threatening to consume her. But the thought of leaving Daniel behind, trapped in that twisted world, was unbearable. As she reached the final page, The words blurred before her eyes. The writer had left a final, desperate plea, warning of the dangers that lay ahead. Emma knew she was on the same path, teetering on the edge of madness, just as they had. But unlike them, she couldn't allow herself to fail. The weight of her guilt, the fear of losing Daniel again, drove her forward, even as her mind began to break under the strain. She had a choice to make, to risk everything, including her sanity, to save her brother, or to turn away and live with the knowledge that she had abandoned him once again. But deep down, Emma knew that the decision had already been made. The shattered window still called to her, and the other world awaited. Chapter 6. The Ritual. The house seemed to react to Emma's resolve with increasing hostility. As she prepared for the ritual described in the journal, the air grew colder, the shadows longer and more menacing. Every step she took felt like a challenge, the oppressive weight of the house pressing down on her with a tangible force. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, weaving through the walls like a dark chorus, urging her to abandon her quest. Ethan tried to reason with her, his face etched with concern. "Emma, I need to tell you something. I've been holding back, but you deserve to know the truth." He paused, gathering his thoughts. The ritual might not be enough. The journal suggests that closing the portal from our side could be only half of it. There's a chance that you might have to enter the other world to truly seal it. Emma's heart pounded as she processed his words. "You're saying I might have to go through the window myself?" she asked, her voice trembling. "And what if I can't come back?" Ethan's eyes were filled with a mix of regret and determination. "Exactly. I know it's a huge risk, but if you want to save your brother and all the other lost children, you might have to make that sacrifice. There's no guarantee you'll return. But if you don't try, they'll remain trapped forever." Emma stood frozen, the enormity of the decision pressing down on her like a physical weight. The ritual, she knew, was her last hope. The journal had outlined the steps clearly, gathered the necessary items, performed the incantation, and closed the portal. But Ethan's revelation had added a layer of complexity she hadn't anticipated. The thought of venturing into that nightmarish world herself was both terrifying and tantalizing. She glanced around the room. At the items, she had painstakingly gathered candles, ancient symbols, and the sacred herbs. The ritual would be a desperate attempt to close the portal, but Ethan's words had introduced a new, more dangerous option. To enter the other world and confront the darkness head-on was a gamble with her life. The temperature in the house plummeted, and the voices grew louder, more frantic. Shadows danced along the walls, as if mocking her indecision. The house seemed to be alive, its malevolent presence pressing in on her from all sides. Emma could almost hear the cries of the lost children, their voices blending with the whispers that had become a constant torment. "Emma, please," Ethan's voice was pleading now. "Think this through. If you go into the other world, it's a one-way trip. You might never come back. But if you stay and perform the ritual, there's a chance, just a chance, that it might work." Emma's mind whirled as she weighed her options. The ritual might succeed, closing the portal and saving her brother without risking her life. But if it didn't, she would have no way of knowing if Daniel and the others were truly free. On the other hand, entering the other world meant confronting her worst fears and possibly losing herself forever. Her decision felt like it was being made for her by forces beyond her control. The shattered window loomed ahead, a dark, beckoning portal to another world. The screams of the lost children seemed to echo in her ears, urging her forward. With a deep breath, Emma made her choice. The ritual was her first step, but she knew that if it failed, she would have to brave the unknown and face the darkness directly. The fear and determination that surged through her were powerful, mingling with the cold reality that whatever path she chose would come with profound consequences. As she lit the candles and arranged the symbols, the house grew even colder, as if it were holding its breath in anticipation. Emma's resolve hardened. She would try the ritual first, but she was prepared for whatever lay beyond that shattered window if it came to that. Chapter 7. The Sacrifice. Emma took a deep breath, her heart racing as she stood before the shattered window, the ritual candles casting eerie flickers of light across her determined face. The chilling air from the other world seeped through the cracks in the glass, mingling with the oppressive atmosphere of the house. With a final glance back at Ethan, who stood at a distance, helpless and worried, Emma steeled herself and stepped through the portal. The transition was jarring, like being pulled through a vortex of icy darkness. She stumbled into a nightmarish replica of her home. The walls were warped, and the floors uneven, as if the very structure had been twisted by some malevolent force. The air was heavy with an oppressive fog that clung to her skin, and the once familiar rooms were now a macabre reflection of reality. The color had drained from everything, leaving behind a grim, monochromatic landscape. Her breath caught as she saw them, the lost children, their ghostly forms drifting through the rooms. Among them was Daniel. He looked even more haunted here, his eyes wide with a mixture of hope and despair. Emma's heart ached as she reached out to him, but he remained just out of grasp, his expression pleading. From the darkness emerged a shapeless entity, an amorphous mass that seemed to absorb the very light around it. It was the source of the nightmares, the heart of this twisted realm. It pulsed with a rhythmic, almost hypnotic energy, feeding off the fear and guilt that permeated the space. The entity's voice echoed through the air, cold and unsettling. "Emma Warren," it intoned, "you have come to bargain. You may leave with your brother, but in return, you must sacrifice yourself to remain here forever. Or you may return alone and seal the portal, ensuring that the lost souls remain trapped in this realm for eternity." Emma's mind raced. The choice was unbearable. The thought of leaving Daniel here, along with all the other lost souls, was a knife in her heart. But the idea of sacrificing herself was equally terrifying. She could feel her own fear and guilt rising up, manifesting as shadowy figures and distorted memories that clawed at her resolve. "No!" Emma shouted, her voice trembling but resolute. "I will not be a prisoner of your dark world. I will not give in to your demands." With a surge of determination, Emma took the ritual items from her bag, the sacred herbs and the ancient symbols, and began to recite the incantations from the journal. The words were choppy and filled with emotion, but she poured her heart into them, channeling her willpower into the ritual. The entity roared in anger, its form shifting and writhing as if in pain. Emma's fears materialized around her, visions of her brother's face twisted in agony, her own failures replayed in a loop of torment. Each image threatened to overwhelm her, but she fought through the suffocating despair. The room quaked as Emma's incantations reached a crescendo. The portal flickered and warped, and the entity's form began to dissolve into dark tendrils that writhed in protest. Emma could feel the struggle within her soul, the battle between her resolve and the entity's manipulations. With a final, desperate cry, she completed the ritual. The air crackled with energy, and the other world began to collapse inward. Emma felt a powerful force pulling her back, and she saw Daniel's ghostly form one last time, a look of sorrowful acceptance on his face. Portals sealed with a deafening roar, and the oppressive fog began to dissipate. Emma was thrown back into her own world, gasping for breath as she collapsed onto the floor. The shattered window was just a window now, its dark allure gone. The house, though still unsettling, seemed quieter, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. She had succeeded, but at what cost? As she lay there, battered and emotionally drained, Emma knew that the scars of her journey would remain with her forever. The portal was closed, and the lost souls were trapped, but she had faced her deepest fears and made the ultimate sacrifice. The weight of her choices would linger, a constant reminder of the darkness she had faced and the light she had fought to reclaim. Chapter 8. The Resolution. Emma's heart pounded as she faced the entity's swirling dark mass. The ritual had succeeded in disrupting the otherworld's stability, but the true test awaited. The walls of the nightmarish version of her home seemed to pulse with a malevolent life of their own, pressing in on her as she prepared for her final act. Daniel's ghostly form hovered nearby, his eyes wide with fear and hope. Emma knew that if she wanted to save him and the other lost children, she had to make the ultimate sacrifice. She took a deep breath, her resolve solidifying as she pushed Daniel towards the shattered window. "Go, Daniel," she urged, her voice cracking with emotion. "Get out of here. I'll seal the portal from the inside." Daniel hesitated, his eyes brimming with tears. "No, Emma. Don't do this." "I have to," she said, forcing a reassuring smile. "It's the only way." With a final, desperate embrace, Emma propelled Daniel through the window. Portal rippled and shimmered, struggling to stay open as he slipped through. Emma's heart ached as she saw his form disappearing into the light beyond, her brother finally free but at the cost of her own escape. Emma turned back to face the entity, her determination unwavering. She began the incantations once more, using the last of her strength to seal the portal from the inside. The entity writhed in agony, its dark form convulsing as Emma's words took effect. The portal shimmered, its edges closing with a menacing finality. As the last traces of the portal vanished, Emma felt a profound emptiness. The oppressive fog began to settle in, and the once twisted home returned to its eerie, desolate stillness. The other world was now sealed, but Emma was trapped within its confines. She had given up her freedom to ensure her brother's survival. Back in the real world, Daniel and Ethan stumbled out of the house, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Daniel's face was pale, his eyes reflecting the trauma of what he had witnessed. Ethan, though physically unharmed, was haunted by the experience and the weight of what had transpired. "Is she?" Daniel's voice was barely a whisper, his gaze fixed on the now sealed window, which looked oddly whole again. Ethan's face was a mixture of sorrow and doubt. "She sacrificed herself for us. For you." The two of them walked away from the house, its once menacing presence now an ominous shadow on the horizon. Daniel clung to the hope that his sister might somehow find a way back, even as Ethan wrestled with the mysteries of what they had endured. The shattered window, now appearing whole, stood as a silent reminder of the dark world that had been sealed away. Its surface was smooth and unremarkable, but for those who knew its true nature, it remained a symbol of lingering dread and unanswered questions. As they drove away, the house receded into the distance, its presence both a farewell and a warning. The end of their ordeal was marked by the unsettling realization that the story of the shattered window might not be entirely over. The echoes of Emma's sacrifice and the mystery of the other world left a haunting possibility that the darkness could one day return. The novel closed on a bittersweet note, with Daniel's hope and Ethan's doubts intertwining, leaving readers with a lingering sense of unease and the haunting suggestion that some stories are never truly finished.